you going to remove the list, like the G46 amendment?
Well, first, it's important to take note that the debate around gun violence comes at a very emotional week. We saw the 33rd anniversary of the shooting tragedy at Polytechnic Institute. We grieved with the families of the victims and indeed some of the victims themselves. It is women like Natalie Prevost and so many others who have suffered gun violence.
That the firearm, the assault weapons is not going to pass now.
I was just going to say, I have come to know Natalie and other victims with whom I have grieved, that we were inspired to do the right thing, which is to put into place a national ban on assault-style rifles. The vast majority of Canadians support that policy because these were guns that were designed for wartime and have no place in our communities. And we are going to work very closely with the committee, who is digging in and researching very carefully the technical language that revolves around the definition of the assault-style rifle through this evergreen provision, and fine-tune it, keep an open mind to doing that, to avoid any unintended consequences around guns that are commonly used by hunters. So that is the process and the stage that we are at. But ultimately, we know that this is the right thing to do.
But where do you draw the line? That's the question. Because some of the assault weapons are used for hunting in Canada, like the SKS, for instance.
Well, look, where we draw the line and where we have been doing that now for 2.5 years is around looking at what the original purpose of the gun was. So if the gun was designed for wartime, if it was designed to exert the maximum lethal force in the shortest period of time, and combined with some other objective parameters which are laid out in the law, then we say that that gun is too dangerous to be in any community. And I think there is a strong consensus around that goal, even including from some of the hunters with whom I've engaged. Last week I visited my colleague Sophie Chatel's riding in Pontiac. I had a chance to listen to them. We're engaging with other industry leaders to really be sure that the list does not inadvertently in any way prohibit guns that are commonly used for hunting. And so as the committee is doing that work very carefully, very thoughtfully, we will support them. But in the final analysis, the bill that we will take back will strike the goal which we have been clear and consistent on all along, which is to take those guns which were designed for the battlefield out of our communities once and for all. And the last thing I'll just say on this is that it's important to have this debate based on facts and not fear. And so, you know, I'm optimistic and confident that we will get there.
Minister, are you going to tell the RCMP to rip out the radio equipment that has been blacklisted by the U.S. regulator?
Well, the first thing I can assure you is that the RCMP is obviously looking very carefully at the equipment issue. I will confirm for you that the equipment was installed, is monitored, is maintained by the RCMP, and so there are some very direct controls over the equipment itself. But look, there's no doubt that there are very legitimate concerns around the way in which the contract was awarded, which is why we're looking very carefully, very closely at it. But national security has to be paramount when awarding these contracts. That's why we put in place a rigorous process to have that screening. I have also said to my department and to all line agencies that we've got to be sure on a go forward that there is increased rigor around how the screening is done when these contracts are awarded, so that we can be sure that we are protecting our critical infrastructure.
Do you know if they follow that? Do you know if they follow that process?
Well, look, obviously if there were any concerns or if there was any flaws in this process around the contract, then there should be very quick and immediate steps taken to suspend or cancel the contract altogether.
But do you know, and are you taking the process to find out?
What I can tell you right now is that I have demanded those answers be provided to me as quickly as possible, and as soon as we have more to say about it, we will. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, vous allez bien?
On the Sovereignty Act passing.
It's the Alberta Sovereignty Act is not going to help one single Albertan get through this affordability crisis. It's not going to help a single business. And quite frankly, it sends a signal to the investment community that the government of Alberta is picking instability over certainty at a time of global uncertainty. I've been doing doors constantly in my riding. Nobody's asking for this act. I mean, look, Alberta's going to lead economic growth in this country for the next 2 to 3 years. Why would you want to get in the way of that train? What we could see is the government telling municipalities, the RCMP, universities, nonprofits to ignore federal law. And that presents great risk to Albertans. And so I think it remains a great distraction. And my appeal to the Premier and to her colleagues is for us to work together, because we've always done great things and done very well for Albertans and Canadians when we work well together. So Tom, what I want to do, and you've heard the Prime Minister very clearly, we're not picking a fight here. What we want to do and what we will continue to do is defend the Federation, defend the country. So I'm very curious and to see how this is going to be used. I'm concerned to see what the applications of this are. I've talked to mayors, I've talked to people in the post-secondary system. They're very nervous, they're very worried about what this could mean. And so there's a lot that we need to do as a country and as Albertans with hydrogen, with artificial intelligence, with feeding the world and fueling the world. So I think the direct answer to your question is we'll see, wait and see, Tom, on this. We'll stay tuned. But the key is we've got to just work together to get things done for Albertans.
Monsieur Boissonnault, il y a quand même un petit peu plus de détails maintenant. Donc vous dites wait and see en anglais, mais vous devez avoir une idée un peu plus claire de comment le fédéral va contester.
Mais la loi, c'est une chose, l'application de la loi, c'est autre chose. Et pour moi, c'est un bon signe que la Première ministre ait décidé d'enlever les pouvoirs extraordinaires pour le cabinet au sein de l'acte de souveraineté de l'Alberta. Mais ça continue à me préoccuper. Ça continue d'être une attaque sur les lois fédérales. Et aussi, c'est préoccupant pour les maires, pour les présidents des institutions postsecondaires, pour les organismes but non lucratifs, parce que ça donne à la législature le pouvoir de leur indiquer, de leur instructer de ne pas respecter les lois fédérales. Et pour moi, ça demeure très préoccupant.
Mais combien de temps vous pouvez vous permettre d'attendre politiquement? Je veux dire, combien de temps vous pouvez vous
Mais je pense que ce qu'il faut faire, c'est qu'il faut suivre de très près comment la loi est appliquée et ensuite on va être capable de mieux savoir qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire comme gouvernement fédéral.
Does this legislation send any kind of signal to the government that maybe it's time to reconsider how the government deals with some communities where you have just less representation? Of course, yourself and Mr. Chahal, the only two representatives from Alberta, and we're seeing lots of controversy around the Bill C-21 amendment where we have a predominantly urban caucus. Is there any pause there to reconsider some of these areas where the government just doesn't have representation?
I'm not sure if there's an issue of changing how we look at representation, but look, we can always do a better job at outreach. I was in Saskatchewan this last weekend for the Liberal Party of Saskatchewan meetings. It was well attended. I mean, there's a province where I want us to do better in the next election, so does our caucus. And I think this is also about getting out of silos and getting out of entrenched positions or perceived entrenched positions, talking to people and making sure that we take their concerns into the development of legislation and our policies, and we'll continue to do that. Thanks, everybody. Merci.
Federal government's temporary program to sponsor Afghan refugees who are not covered under official refugee status has a limit on it that capped out after about 6 weeks after it launched, and advocates are calling for that to change. Will the government look at expanding that program?
Sorry, just which program are you talking about?
The federal government's temporary program to sponsor Afghan refugees who aren't covered under official refugee status.
Sorry, the 3,000 spaces we've opened up for people without a refugee status determination. So right now we've got allocations for at least 40,000 spaces. In addition to the 3,000 that we've waived, sorry, can I just ditch a bag here?
Absolutely.
In addition to the waiver of the refugee status determination for this cohort of 3,000, we had previously waived the need for refugee status determination for the special immigration measures, those who worked alongside the Canadian forces, as well as the private sponsorship that came through the sponsorship agreement holders. The 3,000 was an expansion of the groups of people in Canada who could sponsor people without a refugee status determination. So it's not just those who are working with the sponsorship agreement holder, but in addition those who want to go through the Group of Five or community sponsorship program. We always look at the different opportunities that we have, but with the spaces that we had left in the 40,000 we'd committed to, we had the 3,000 that we made that decision for. We don't currently have plans to extend it to further numbers because it would eat away at the allocations that are already committed to other groups who are working to sponsor people as well.
Now, we learned that the rejected applications are included in that 3,000 number, and advocates are calling for that to change as well. Will you look at changing that part of it?
We're looking to have 3,000 people be resettled in Canada as a result of that. The 3,000 people that would not include applications that were made that were rejected, but the challenge that we have when we max out the 3,000 spaces, we don't want to anticipate that there will be a certain number of applications rejected and then have us approve more people than we actually have space to take. We want to make sure that when we signal to a person that they've been approved to come to Canada, we can guarantee that that's the case. To the extent that we have more rejections than were anticipated for a variety of reasons, we'll use those spaces to welcome more people through private sponsorship to Canada.
Thank you.
Hi, Minister.
Thanks very much.
Well, some Liberal MPs are breaking ranks on your government's gun legislation. Is it a sign that, it's just bad legislation, you need to make tweaks, changes?
So look, let's start with first principles. We made a commitment to place a ban on assault-style firearms, as well as restrictions on the sale and transfer of handguns. I'm somebody who grew up in a rural community. My family has a long history of hunting. I think that we're going to continue to have some work to do to make sure that the Canadian public understands that we meant it when we said that this is meant to target assault-style firearms and handguns, and not the ordinary firearms that are used for hunting purposes. We're going to continue to work with our rural colleagues, and both those in Cabinet and in the broader caucus, as well as MPs across party lines, to make sure that we're continuing to bring the focus on the assault-style firearms and the handguns that we originally talked about.
So you think there needs to be changes? You come from a rural background.
Yeah, look, we need to make sure that, look, one of the things that I also want to draw attention to is the fact that for good reasons, there's very technical descriptions in the proposed amendments that I think have been interpreted by some to include a wider variety of firearms used for hunting, which are not, in fact, included. If you actually look at the way the list is structured, it includes a list of firearms that are actually excluded. Some of the people who have reached out to me said, hey, I see the firearm listed here that I use for hunting, when in fact it's a list of firearms that are explicitly excluded from any sort of a ban. I think we have some work to do to provide clarity to the Canadian public, and to the extent that through the committee process we have an opportunity to hear from people on how the bill can be improved. Of course, we're always open to what suggestions may come to maintain the focus on the assault-style weapons and handguns.
Awesome. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bonjour, Monsieur Duclos. Bonjour. Juste des questions. On a vu hier une franco-ontarienne dans le rapport de la commissaire aux services en français qui était mourante, puis qui n'a pas reçu qui s'est fait dire de speak in English, s'il vous plaît, alors qu'elle était mourante, puis c'est un établissement francophone. Au Québec, on a vu des reportages là, de Montréal de francophones qui peur de se faire traiter en français dans les hôpitaux. Est-ce que ça vous inquiète, là, ou c'est juste des anecdotes selon vous un peu?
Ben, c'est sûr que c'est inquiétant. On a vu ça un peu partout au pays dans les derniers mois, y compris dans un contexte autochtone. On se souvient de Joyce. Donc, les gens ont besoin et les gens ont le droit de se faire traiter dans des conditions qui sont respectueuses de leurs conditions. Alors, ça dépend évidemment des provinces et territoires. Le gouvernement canadien est toujours en appui aux responsabilités des provinces et territoires. Les provinces et territoires doivent assumer leur responsabilité de respecter le droit d'être traités correctement.
Est-ce que ça dépasse la phase, on pourrait dire, anecdotique pour vous? Est-ce que ça vient d'une certaine tendance un peu qu'on voit un peu partout au pays? Bien,
je dirais que mes homologues, les ministres de la Santé des provinces et territoires, sont très conscients de l'importance de traiter respectueusement leurs gens. Et donc, ce que j'entends à leur niveau est le bon langage, évidemment. Comment ça se passe sur le terrain, à nouveau, c'est la responsabilité des provinces et des territoires.
On a entendu un peu, notamment au Québec, après le montage à Montréal, que le plus important, c'est peut-être de recevoir des soins avant de se préoccuper de la langue. Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça?
Bien, c'est clair. Écoutez, on l'a vu à nouveau dans le contexte de Joyce Echaquan, on le voit à nouveau là, dans un contexte linguistique en Ontario, au Québec aussi et ailleurs. Quand on est malade, on a besoin d'être traité dignement et respectueusement. Alors, oui, on sait que c'est une responsabilité des provinces et des territoires, mais si je peux répéter ce que j'entends de mes collègues ministres de la Santé à travers le pays, c'est que oui, les gens doivent être traités avec respect et partout, peu importe les conditions dans lesquelles ils se retrouvent.
Merci beaucoup.
C'était pas un problème de langue, c'était un problème de linguistique.
Il y a plusieurs équipes dans la Ligue nationale. Par exemple, le Canadien, quand il va jouer aux États-Unis, il y a l'hymne national qui est chanté dans les deux langues. Et quand ça se passe au Canada et à l'extérieur du Québec, c'est juste en anglais souvent. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça? Est-ce que vous pensez, mettons, quand le Canadien va jouer ailleurs au Canada, est-ce que l'hymne national, ça serait le fun qu'il soit chanté dans les deux langues?
Ben, moi, personnellement, j'aimerais ça que ce soit chanté dans les deux langues. Le Canada est un pays bilingue, donc, et notre hymne national est bilingue.
Il y a un gel des embauches à patrimoine canadien jusqu'à la fin de l'année budgétaire. Quel impact ça va avoir sur l'aspect sport et les initiatives que vous essayez de mettre de l'avant?
Ben, on va regarder au niveau budgétaire, puis évidemment, nous, notre objectif avec Sport Canada, c'est de réorganiser un petit peu les effectifs, puis les effectifs et les expertises à l'interne. Donc, on va travailler avec notre budget, puis on va faire en sorte que Sport Canada a ce qu'il a de besoin là, pour bien faire le travail.
La joueuse de basketball, Brittney Griner, a été libérée de la Russie après 294 jours de détention. Votre réaction à ça?
Bien, j'imagine qu'elle est extrêmement soulagée, ainsi que sa famille. Donc, c'est une bonne chose qu'elle puisse rentrer aux États-Unis. Évidemment, on s'oppose toujours aux détentions arbitraires des pays étrangers. Merci beaucoup.
Madame Lebouthillier, mais votre désaccord avec la vérificatrice générale, est-ce que c'est normal, selon vous, d'être autant en désaccord avec la vérificatrice générale?
Non, écoutez, on est en accord avec une bonne partie du rapport de la vérificatrice générale qui fait un travail incroyable, puis qui est indépendante. Mais au niveau des chiffres, on a commencé les vérifications. Donc, pour avoir les vrais chiffres, il va falloir attendre un peu plus tard, et c'est au niveau des chiffres sur lesquels on ne s'entend pas.
Mais vous la contredisez quand même?
Pas du tout, pas du tout.
La loi était mal faite en base, peut-être? Qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire par activité essentielle, puis pourquoi est-ce que c'est nécessaire aujourd'hui?
Ça relève la fonction publique, mais ce qu'il y a eu, c'est qu'il y a eu énormément d'embauches aussi pour des programmes pendant la pandémie. Donc, il y a eu des efforts supplémentaires demandés à Patrimoine. Et voilà.
Est-ce qu'il y a eu trop d'embauches?
Faudrait regarder du côté des fonctionnaires, mais on a fait le nécessaire pour livrer. Parce qu'il faut comprendre que le secteur de la culture est le secteur qui a été le plus touché ou l'un des plus touchés. Il y avait énormément de programmes mis de l'avant. Il n'y a rien d'avoir là-dedans de spécial.
C'est 11, c'est 18, c'est 13. Vous êtes en train de dire que ces projets de loi-là n'obtiendront pas de nouveaux employés ou n'auront pas de...
Non. Au niveau, par exemple, du CRTC, qui devient le régulateur pour les projets de loi C11-C18, on a déjà prévu de l'argent dans le dernier budget, 1,9 million. Donc, le CRTC a tous les fonds nécessaires. Et nous aussi, on a tous les fonds nécessaires pour ça.
Les embauches vont se faire...
Non, mais c'est prévu. C'est-à-dire que dans nos embauches, dans le travail que l'on fait, on a prévu le passage de C11-C18 en espérant que les conservateurs vont arrêter de filibuster, là. Mais une fois qu'ils vont passer, on aura le personnel nécessaire pour le faire.
Est-ce que vous allez couper des postes d'ici la fin de l'année budgétaire?
Wow, attendez une minute, là.
Oui, je pose la question.
Je ne gère pas la pièce, là, le personnel du ministère.
Mais c'est votre ministère quand même.
Oui, mais je ne gère pas la pièce, le personnel du ministère. Ce que je vous dis, comme ministre, c'est qu'on aura le personnel nécessaire pour C11, C18 et toute la question d'aide en ligne qui est très importante qui va arriver sous peu.
Le Sénat, quand est-ce qu'on va voir ça?
D'accord avec les amendements du
faudrait peut-être que le projet de loi sorte du Sénat. Je veux juste rappeler que ça fait presque 7 mois qu'il est dans le Sénat, qu'ils ont eu 120 témoins, 40 heures de témoignages. Ça, c'est après les 80 témoins de la Chambre des communes et toutes les consultations qu'il y a eu. Donc, ce projet de loi qui est fondamental pour le milieu culturel, et on a hâte qu'il sorte.
Mais vous dites que ça fait longtemps que c'est au Sénat, mais est-ce que ça veut dire que c'est trop tard pour faire les amendements? Vous trouvez que ça aurait dû être...
Dans la vie, il n'est jamais trop tard pour rien.
Donc, vous allez les regarder une fois que ça va être...
On va regarder les amendements, mais il faut revenir à la base. Le C11, c'est simplement de demander aux streamers, qu'on aime beaucoup, là, je suis sûr que tout le monde a un ou l'autre, que ce soit Disney, Netflix ou Prime ou quoi que ce soit. Là. On leur demande de contribuer à la culture canadienne. Donc, plus de musique, de films québécois, canadiens, ainsi de suite. C'est tout. Alors, on espère qu'ils sortent parce que c'est nécessaire.
Mais c'est la façon dont c'est fait, c'est le principe de découvrabilité.
La découvrabilité est très importante aussi. Rappelez-vous, excuse-moi une seconde, rappelez-vous à l'époque, quand vous alliez acheter, peut-être moi les gens plus vieux, là, quand on allait acheter un disque, là, on regardait, puis à côté de la caisse, ils mettaient des disques qu'on pouvait voir, puis c'est comme ça qu'on faisait la promotion. Ou on avait une petite cabine pour écouter quelque chose. Aujourd'hui, la découvrabilité, c'est devenu en ligne. Il faut qu'on puisse voir ce que l'on produit. Alors même si on investit beaucoup d'argent, puis ça aide les gens à produire des choses extraordinaires, si on les voit pas, ça donne rien, alors il faut les voir.
Mais vous avez vu les propositions du Sénat, donc ça va, c'est quoi?
I wanted to ask you about a new study from a think tank that identified wait times to see a specialist and get treated as the longest they have ever been since the Fraser Institute did the study in 1993. They average 27 weeks now. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, that is correct, and it's mostly due because of the healthcare workers crisis. Many of them have left over the last few months. Many of them are sick. Many of them are absent from their workplace. Obviously, the additional load that COVID-19 has brought on them with lots of backlogs in surgeries and diagnostics. So yes, it's a very serious and severe situation now for workers and patients across Canada.
And I know you had talks with the provincial health ministers that sort of fell apart. What's the next step in that, though, to resolve this crisis? How do we move on from that and get to somewhere where maybe those wait times start dropping again?
We're doing three things. The first is we are investing significant additional resources, additional to the Canada Health Transfer, the $2 billion to help support workers to reduce backlogs in surgeries and diagnostics. The second thing, as you saw just a few days ago, is that we are putting into place measures to accelerate the incorporation and recognition of credentials for foreign trained workers. And the third thing is that I'm continuing my work with my colleagues, health ministers, on how we can further support them, in the long term included, because we are in a world in which the population is aging, so severe pressures also in the long term regarding that.
When do you get back to the table with those provincial health ministers? What is the plan for resuming those conversations to maybe fix this issue long term?
I'm engaged with them almost every week, and my officials talk almost every day. In ways, like I mentioned just a moment ago, to make sure that we bring in Canada more workers from abroad. Once they arrive in Canada, we recognize their credentials more rapidly. We support more nurses and doctors being trained in Canada through the $2 billion investment I just announced. And we are going to, I'm sure, come out publicly on the things we agreed to privately, that is, support workers, support patients, and make our data system more modern.
Thanks, Brian. The last talk sort of fell apart over this issue, over the issue of money, and premiers wanted to get involved. The premiers wanted the Prime Minister at the table. Is that part of the plan? Is the Prime Minister going to sit down with premiers on this issue soon?
Well, on money, there's lots of money either already being sent or having been sent or being sent now. The increase in the Canada Health Transfer of 5% just a few months ago, and an additional 10% in March 2023. Long-term care, home care, mental health care, additional dollars for that too. But we need to agree now on results and speak about those results publicly. We did privately agree on those results in Vancouver. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to speak to those results publicly.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il y a des milliers de dossiers pénaux annulés au Québec là, parce que le DPCP faisait affaire avec Post Canada pendant la pandémie, puis il n'y avait pas de signature pour dire que la personne avait bel et bien reçu?
C'est toujours inquiétant quand il y a des problèmes, des tels problèmes dans le système juridique. Nous avons tous une responsabilité d'améliorer les parties qui tombent sur notre compétence. J'espère. On a le projet de loi S4 qui va aider les procédures à distance, largement inspirées par les provinces. Et donc, j'espère, en tant que ministre de la Justice, de terminer le processus parlementaire avec ce projet de loi aussitôt que possible pour justement aider les tribunaux à travers le Canada.
Le DPCP à Québec a mal fait son travail, là?
Je vais critiquer personne. La pandémie a été une période difficile pour tout le monde. Nous avons réagi dans plusieurs domaines, justement pour faire marcher le système à travers le Canada. Moi, je travaille avec le juge en chef Wagner, justement pour créer des ressources pour les tribunaux à travers le Canada. Donc, nous avons tous une responsabilité, mais je vais évidemment, on va de l'avant, on va améliorer le système et je fais ma part.